I'm much more comfortable writing and doing that kind of stuff. So I figured I'd, you know, if there's a need for it, might as well stay in my lane as much as possible. But also I have to go on occasionally and be like, you should read things that I write if you're interested in what I'm saying on whatever, podcast or thing I happen to appear on. So anyway, sorry for rambling a little
Oh
bit.
no. I'm extremely grateful that you're coming on podcast because it's just so hard to find time to read. And like what you're saying, it seems like so much of journalism has become like a reaction to a reaction to a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
People are reacting to tweets. Like I'm always seeing articles reacting to tweets, and I'm like, why are
Yeah.
tweets should be reacting to things that are happening, or articles, not the other way around, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a type for every type of tweet, I guess, but it's not good that it overwhelmingly dominates the discourse. There should definitely, at the very least, be a healthy mix. And I think it's become less of a mix and more of what you just described within that. So that's what I did, and I wanted to use that, but couldn't really find anything that paid or seemed interesting to me in the States, and was kind of disillusioned with the US already by then a little bit. And so I, just came to South America and had been doing stuff and hadn't really found the right fit, and then ended up writing, and then it kind of took over my life, I guess, a little bit. But in terms of tackling the topics that matter, I've never really been dissuaded from that, I guess, in a sense. I growing up and also in college and before I left the US, I definitely had like lived that experience of sort of being like an outcast, or people thinking I was like weird for my views. So I didn't really like have that aversion to writing about things that maybe some other people uh would have if they have like, close friends or close family that would be very upset if they were to say you're right about such things. I didn't really have that. Just read volume 2 at that point. And in volume 2 is where I make that argument too. That by the time, well after Epstein's first arrest and before his second arrest in 2019, really it was more, it's really all about technology at this point. And a lot of the same people that had been involved with Epstein are part of this network. Like Ghislaine Maxwell's father, for example, Robert Maxwell, were involved in intelligence-linked operations to backdoor, critical infrastructure in the United States. And there's been a long history of people trying to, obtain intelligence through surreptitious means. And so sexual blackmail for a long time was part of that. But once sort of the internet and technology came to dominate, our lives in the post 2000s era, it's not really necessary to have someone doing sexual blackmail in the way that Epstein did. There's the fact that Epstein does, as you pointed out, remain a cultural phenomena. I think a lot has been done to sort of maintain the spectrum of interest in Epstein's specifically on sex crimes and people who may be on the quote unquote client list and things like that. And really, if you look at Epstein, he was not mainly a sex blackmailer. He was mainly, as for lack of a better word, a financial criminal that facilitated financial crimes of very, very wealthy people and also of intelligence services. And had, a pretty outsized role in the collapse of Bear Stearns, for example, which helped bring on the 2008 economic crash. And what does it mean to have someone tied to intelligence and engaged in all these other activities, instigating a major economic meltdown? And he was known to be a major currency speculator as well. Bill Clinton wanted to meet with him in 1995 to management.
Okay, yeah, and now
Mm-hmm.
so now you're saying that so Epstein used to be the tool for sexual blackmail before, but now that new tool is technology. So are they able to like hack your webcam and get a video of you, and then they say, "Hey, look, we filmed you doing this thing. You're ours now." Is that how it works, or?
Well, all of that is possible. It is known that U.S. intelligence can access people's devices remotely, and as I mentioned earlier, you have not only Epstein having all of these ties to what are now our biggest, the people that run or created the biggest companies, in big tech, but a lot of those big tech companies were created with the direct involvement of our intelligence service, right? So, as an example, Oracle, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, created by Larry Ellison. And before he created Oracle, he was working on Project Oracle at the CIA and then turned it into a company that was the 1980s, at least. Maybe earlier, but we can definitely pinpoint key examples of it happening in the 80s and afterward.
Yes, I've heard you mention Palantir quite a bit, and in preparation for this conversation, I tried to look at what they did, and it immediately reminded me of like Minority Report or some dystopian
Mm-hmm.
situation where people don't have
Yes.
free will and you can determine what a criminal is going to do before they do it, and then you arrest them, and there's all sorts of ethical questions. Is that what Palantir is saying that they're doing?
They have been piloting that. They call it predictive policing. I think they first started admittedly piloting it in 2015 in New Orleans and later in Los Angeles. And they had to shut down those programs because there was a big outcry because they were testing it almost exclusively in minority dominant neighborhoods. And its algorithm was accused of being very racially biased, which is actually very common with things by Republican and Democrat administrations alike. It's definitely in my opinion, a long-standing national security agenda that is, if not openly, bipartisanly supported. It is so, at least privately, because you can see that through the policy actions of really every administration since 9/11. So I think people need to be very aware that the threat for this type of system being implemented more widely does exist because the infrastructure is there. And there have been presidents in the past that have considered pretty disconcerting overreach as far as that's concerned. And every government in the United States or every presidential administration has expanded Palantir's contracting. So now, in the wake of COVID-19, Palantir has all of Americans' health data, basically. They were given that during COVID-19. They were a key partner in Operation Warp Speed, deciding which groups, of like a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation style thing, but based in the UK, comes out of the fortune of the company Burroughs Wellcome that made the AZT drug that became infamous during the 1980s in AIDS. Among other products. But the Wellcome Trust has an historic, very close tie to, eugenics and eugenic-like thought and the idea of racial hygiene and all of this stuff that is, obviously very messed up. And they've been doing a lot of weird financing of stuff in the public health space, particularly in the global south for some time. So I think a lot of that stuff does deserve careful consideration and scrutiny. And I think that, obviously a lot of these elite figures don't see the masses as sort of being as valuable to the world as they are, and thus see them as more expendable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's plans to murder